Pteridium, aquilinum. Nickname for this plant is eagle's wings. This is part 1, and in part 2 I'll be sharing a mnemonic or memory technique to help you commit to memory the most distinguishing characteristics of this plant for identifying purposes. Be sure to watch all of part 1 so that part 2 is understandable. This is a weedy plant. When mature, it grows to about 3 to 6 feet tall, can grow up to 10 feet tall. As you see here, what is referred to as leaflets are broad. They are triangular shaped and resemble a bird's wing. This is where the plant derives its nickname from, eagle's wings. As you see, just as wings are while they are in flight, these leaflets are parallel or close to parallel to the ground. That is one of the many distinguishing characteristics of this plant. In the mnemonic, I make reference to a river, a stream, and a creek. The river represents the stem of the leaf. This plant emanates or emerges from the ground, not from a true stem, but this entire plant here is actually one entire leaf, a tri-pennate leaf, compound leaf. Pennate in botany means feather-like. And the mnemonic, to help you remember the tri or 3 sections of this leaf, is where the river, stream, and creek come in. Now, the main stem of this leaf is what is referred to as the river. And flowing into the river are streams, which is true in a topographical discussion. And into the stream flows the still smaller creeks, which is also true in a topographical discussion. The river holds the leaflets. This is a leaflet. The streams hold the subleaflets, narrow, oblong, and in the mnemonic, at the end of the creek, or at the tip of each of these creeks, there will be a group of subleaflets. Again, this is the leaflet, subleaflet, and subleaflets. Now at the tip of this subleaflet The sub-subleaflets do not cut into the midrib of this subleaflet, or it does not cut into the creek, giving the tip an appearance, or it resembles a rattlesnake's rattle. This description or this explanation will help you to visualize what I'm referring to again in part 2 in the mnemonic coming up. Getting back to this entire leaf, what emerges from the ground is not a true stem. It is a leaf stem. Again, the river. The true stem is actually under the ground. It is a creeping rhizome, rhizomous roots, creep or crawl beneath the ground, similar to a rope. And from these horizontal root systems grow the leaves. Notice the tips not cutting all the way into the midrib as these lower sub-subleaflets do. The texture of these subleaflets are leathery and coarse. They are blunt, tipped, Now this illustration shows us a number of things. The cross section of the rhizomous roots. It shows us how the leaves grow from out of these roots. This develops into what is referred to as a fiddlehead. Now, the leaf stem, or the river, has 3 forks, or branches off into 3 sections. This discoloration here represents the felt-like texture, which is common at the lower portion of the leaf stem. Now this 3 forks is more easily recognizable when the leaf is in fiddlehead stage, just like this or like this. Once the leaf matures, it's more difficult to identify the 3 forks. This image represents one of the sub-subleaflets. The bottom of the sub-subleaflet has around the edges spores. We'll see a much better picture of this later, and I'll get into more detail as to what that is and what it represents. Three forks, three-forked. One terminal, two opposite. Spores beneath the outer edges of the sub-leaflet blades. This plant has a tendency to grow in colonies. This is a picture of a fiddlehead, and it is where the common name for all fern new shoots this is the new growth or new shoot of the eagle's wings plant. The stems are rigid, and as you see, they are covered with silvery gray hairs. Tightly curled. They are edible at this point. When these leaves unfurl, they become toxic and are not edible. As long as they are at this stage, less than 8 inches tall, 2 inches tall are best. They are edible. Again, notice the three forks. All of these are edible because, again, the leaves, or the leaflets, to be technical, have not unfurled. This is a picture of a cook preparing these to be boiled. In this plant, I'd like for you to notice how these small hairs appear to be white, but they're at a closer, when you look closer, they'll be more of a silvery gray. But because there are some fiddleheads which will be covered in white fuzz, the fuzz will be much more dense and clearly white, and the hairs longer. Those type of fiddleheads, as well as fiddleheads which are reddish or purplish, you would want to stay away from. All other fiddleheads are edible, whether they are eagle's wings fiddleheads or not. Just as long as they're green, they are tightly curled, and they are not covered with white fuzz, dense white fuzz, and they are not reddish or purplish. They're edible. All fiddleheads being edible is a myth. You might choose to cut these fiddleheads here and prepare them for edibility, or cut them here. Typically, as long as they are under 8 inches tall, and most especially as long as the leaflets have not uncurled. If you see the 3-forked stem here of the leaf or the river, you will know that it's an eagle's wings. These fiddleheads are much smaller, as you see, probably 2 inches tall. They are edible, just as edible, raw or cooked. Resembling the fiddlehead we saw earlier, the brown fiddlehead with the black knobs, the instrument. This picture shows us a cross section of the stem, the river stem. You'll notice a U groove similar to celery. That groove is illustrated here along the front or on one side of the river stem or of the main stem. From the rhizomatous roots, or this technically being the stem, but called the rhizome, there are fibrous hairs that grow from out of these rhizomes, which is also characteristic of this plant. Again, as we saw in the previous illustration, this again is a cross section of the rhizome, which can be 1 inch thick. This is a poisonous or toxic fiddlehead. As you see, it's much more obviously covered with dense white hairs. I included this photo in this slideshow just to give you an illustration of the contrast. This, again, is a leaflet coming from off of the river. This would be called what? If it's coming off of the river, the main stem, this, again, for mnemonic purposes, this is called what? And this would then be called what? This is the stream, and this is the creek. And at the tip of the creek, we have, because the sub-leaflets don't cut all the way into the creek or into the midrib of this subleaflet, we have rattles or snake rattles here at the end. Very characteristic of this particular fern. Now, this is a close-up of some sub-leaflets. And I believe it's another slide which demonstrates or illustrates how these the veins of these sub-leaflets are two-forked. But in either case, you can see how even the sub-leaflets by themselves, not just at the tip, sometimes, not always, they too resemble a snake's rattle. Here's a tip. Blunt tips here. This is a drawing of the underside of one of the sub-leaflets. During the summer, you will find spores, which are carried by the wind currents, can carry these tiny spores for hundreds and thousands of miles for propagation. This is how the plant multiplies itself, not by seeds, but by spores. They're not pollinated by insects, but the spores are carried again by wind currents to various other places. Rattlers. Spores beneath the sub-leaflets. Now they can sometimes be almost hidden because the edges do curl under. Notice how these veins have two forks in them. That's consistent throughout the top and bottom of these sub-leaflets, two forks. And in the mnemonic, this is associated with not the bottom part of the snake, which is represented by the rattle, but these two forks is associated with the top or the head of the snake and its tongue. All those two forks again, see them? The spores, this is the underside. Leathery, coarse texture, dark green. Now the stems turn dark brown with age, but they start out being green. This is another picture of the veins, two-forked. This does not show us the spores because the spores are short-lived, or they are visible for a short period of time. One or two of my resources mention how they are actually rarely found, but they are not a critical part of identifying the plant at all. Remember, this is the entire leaf. No true stem emerges from the ground. The stem is underground, represented by the rhizomous roots. The river, the stream, the creek. And at the end of the creek, we have what? The rattle. This picture shows us some fungus, which is sometimes present on the underside of the sub-leaflets. Not to be concerned of whether or not they are edible at this stage, because obviously this is beyond the fiddlehead stage, so we should not be concerned about that. For medicinal purposes either. Just feel free to use these leaves for other uses not associated with edibility. They can be used for medicinal purposes. But if it were me, I would just naturally stay away from these. Heard and have read no references to this being discarded for medicinal purposes. Now, where the leaflet stem or the stream meets the main leaf stem or the river, there is what's referred to as glands or nectaries. Technically in botany, these are referred to as nectaries. These glands produce a nectar, a very sweet, sugary nectar, which attract ants. Now these glands are crescent shaped or moon shaped, or like a crescent moon shape. You'll find that they are larger near the base of the river, and they become smaller as you ascend this main leaf stem or the river stem. Notice the silvery gray hairs. Here we can see that U groove again. tri or three-forked, tri-forked U groove. While even being a little pubescent or hairy, the stem is smooth. An older leaf, because it is dark brown and not green, not covered in a very thick, dense, white fuzz. Here is a picture of some rhizomes. You can barely see the cross section of them here. They are rigid. They're black. Rather than rigid, I may well have said woody. They have a woody texture. Very firm. Scaly. Fibrous roots. All of this center of the rhizome, by the way, is what will be referred to on the fact sheet of this plant is a very starchy middle. It's a very starchy substance. You'll see references to this under the other uses portion of the fact sheet, as well as the edibility or methods of preparation portion. And the edible parts of this plant are the roots and the new shoots, which again are referred to as fiddleheads. This has been part 1, and in part 2 I'll be sharing a mnemonic or memory technique to help you commit to memory the most distinguishing characteristics of this plant for identifying purposes. To learn how to prepare these edible parts, visit survivalplantsmemorycourse.com and click on the Pteridium aquilinum link. Right on that same line, you can choose, it will also reveal the nickname Eagle's Wings or the the Brackenfern. It'll take you to the fact sheet, and the methods of preparation is found there. Thank you for watching.